The administration has used that declaration as a pretext to impose sweeping tariffs on a friend, on a neighbor, on an ally, which are taxes paid by American consumers and businesses on Canadian imports.
In Washington, something unusual is happening. A U.S. senator is standing up not against a foreign rival, but against her own president, and for Canada. That's the story unfolding this week as Senator Amy Klobuchar, joined by both Democrats and Republicans, takes the floor of the U.S. Senate to demand an end to President Trump's tariffs on Canadian goods. At a time when the White House keeps declaring economic victory, the reality looks far different. The tariffs that were supposed to protect America's economy are now dividing its own leaders. Even inside Congress, voices are rising to say what many Americans already feel, that this trade war has gone too far and that its victims are not in Ottawa, but at home. When even Washington senators start echoing the same frustration Canadians have been expressing for months, you know something fundamental has shifted. The resolution introduced by Senator Klobuchar wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was a bipartisan act, backed by Senators Tim Kaine, Rand Paul, Mark Warner, and Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, aimed at formally ending the national emergency Trump invoked to justify tariffs on Canada. Their message is simple: the so-called emergency doesn't exist. There's no security threat at the northern border, no crisis in cross-border trade, only a policy built on political impulse. In April 2025, the Senate had already voted once to terminate the same emergency declaration, but the administration refused to lift it. Instead, it doubled down, raising tariffs to 35% on August 1st, and then added another 10% in late October, this time, astonishingly, in response to a provincial ad campaign from Ontario that used Ronald Reagan's old speech criticizing protectionism. For many in Congress, this was the breaking point. What began as an argument over trade had turned into a test of constitutional power. Lawmakers from both parties began to agree that tariffs imposed by presidential mood swings were destabilizing not just the economy, but America's credibility. It's rare to see Rand Paul and Chuck Schumer agree on anything, yet this time they did, because no matter where they stand politically, they could see that punishing Canada, a historic ally, was punishing America itself. Behind the politics lies a straightforward economic truth. Every tariff is a tax, one that American consumers and businesses pay first. Since the new tariffs began in March 2025, the costs have rippled across U.S. households and industries. According to data cited in the Senate hearing, the average American family is paying nearly $2,000 more per year for everyday goods. Small businesses and tourism towns near the border are feeling it most, with fewer visitors and rising costs for supplies. Aluminum cans, lumber, and farm equipment, all dependent on cross-border supply chains, have become more expensive not because of shortages, but because of policy. Economically, it's a loop that feeds itself. When the U.S. taxes imports from Canada, it drives up domestic prices, reduces consumer spending, and hurts exports in return. The problem isn't abstract. It's visible in empty stores along border towns and the 20% drop in Canadian visitors this year reported by state tourism boards. So while the administration calls these tariffs America First, the reality looks more like America turning on itself. North of the border, the response has been measured. Prime Minister Mark Carney, who met recently with several U.S. senators in Ottawa, has avoided escalation. Instead, he keeps stressing dialogue and long-term stability. During those meetings, Carney reportedly told lawmakers that the U.S.-Canada relationship has become mostly transactional. For many Canadians, that single phrase captured the current era perfectly. It signaled that Canada is no longer willing to define its economic identity through Washington's choices. In fact, each new tariff from the White House has only strengthened the case for diversification. Canadian trade missions are multiplying across Asia, and public sentiment at home has shifted sharply towards supporting Buy Canadian initiatives. While American politics seem locked in a cycle of tariff announcements and Senate rebellions, Ottawa's tone is calm, consistent, and confident. It's not the noise of confrontation that defines leadership, but the discipline to outlast it. Back in Washington, the debate is no longer about whether tariffs are good or bad. It's about limits on power, on law, and on the president's ability to use emergency authority to change trade policy at will. The Senate resolution that Klobuchar and her colleagues pushed forward marks one of the few times in recent memory that Congress has united across party lines to check executive power. The courts, too, are weighing in. A federal trade court panel, composed of judges appointed by 3 different presidents, unanimously ruled that the administration's broad use of emergency powers to impose these tariffs was unlawful under the 1977 National Emergencies Act. Their decision underscored a simple principle: Congress controls the power to tax, not the White House. Economically, the message is just as significant. It reflects a growing recognition that the stability of North American trade, built over decades through the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, cannot survive under constant policy whiplash. When tariffs change 100 times in a single year, as trade groups testified, no company can plan investments or hiring. The revolt in Washington, then, isn't just political. It's a reminder that predictability is part of prosperity. Ironically, while America wrestles with its own divisions, Canada is experiencing a quiet surge in national confidence. The tariffs that were supposed to pressure Canada's economy have instead unified public opinion and accelerated industrial policy. Across provinces, industries are investing more at home and turning outward to new Asian markets. Even U.S. border towns are feeling it, with fewer Canadian visitors and struggling small shops. Tourism losses are now visible across several states. To many observers, it's a striking reversal. The tariffs intended to demonstrate strength have exposed weakness, a U.S. policy so erratic that its own senators, courts, and business groups are working to restrain it. Meanwhile, Canada's measured patience is earning global respect. In the end, this debate is no longer about tariffs or trade statistics. It's about how a nation governs itself under pressure. When senators from both parties rise in the same chamber to tell a president that he's gone too far, it marks a turning point. The same words that once united Americans against foreign competition are now being used to defend cooperation with one of their oldest allies. The lesson is simple. Economic nationalism sounds powerful in a speech, but fragile in practice. Tariffs can start as tools of leverage and end as symbols of isolation. For Canada, the turmoil south of the border is no longer a threat, it's validation. Every time Washington chooses confrontation over cooperation, Canada's case for independence grows stronger. Its leaders are choosing strategy over spectacle, stability over chaos, and long-term partnership over short-term politics. As history has shown, real strength isn't measured by how loudly a country shouts, but by how steadily it stands. And right now, Canada is standing tall, while America argues with itself.
We are confident that the domestic pressure from senators, governors, business leaders, union leaders in the United States will also create potentially an opportunity for us to come to an agreement with the American administration.
Canada's Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc has just delivered a message that cuts through the noise of tariffs, counter-tariffs, and political maneuvering. He declared that he is confident trade deals with the United States can still be reached. At first glance, it may sound optimistic, even overly so, given the hostile environment. But in truth, the statement is more than optimism. It is a sign that Canada sees leverage in a situation many assumed was stacked against it. This declaration comes at a time when Washington has unleashed some of the most aggressive trade measures in recent history. Under President Donald Trump's second term, tariffs have been applied broadly, with rates ranging from 10 to 50% on major partners. Canada has been hit particularly hard. Lumber, steel, aluminum, cabinets, and furniture are all facing steep duties as goods cross the border. These measures were supposed to pull jobs back to Detroit, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and showcase Trump as the dealmaker who could force allies to bend. Instead, they have set in motion forces that now threaten to undermine that very strategy.
Canada would not do what Japan, the EU, and others have done and settle for an across-the-board tariff from the U.S. in exchange for dropping sectoral tariffs leveled on softwood, steel, and aluminum.
When LeBlanc insisted Canada still has leverage, it was not bluster. His reasoning rests on the political and economic pain these tariffs are causing inside the United States. Governors, senators, business leaders, and union representatives are pressing the White House because they see the costs firsthand. Higher raw material prices are squeezing construction companies. Furniture makers in the Midwest are losing access to affordable inputs. Steel and aluminum duties are pushing up prices for auto parts and machinery. These ripple effects have made the tariffs a live issue in state capitals and in Congress. Ottawa has taken calculated steps in this environment. It rolled back many of its retaliatory tariffs to demonstrate a willingness to find common ground. Yet at the same time, Canada refused to strike a deal that mirrors what Japan or the European Union accepted. Those partners agreed to across-the-board tariff ceilings in exchange for relief on targeted products. Canada has drawn a different line. It insists that sector-specific duties on lumber, steel, and aluminum must be addressed directly.
And LeBlanc rejected the idea that protecting supply management, that's the system that shields dairy and poultry farmers in Canada from U.S. and foreign competition.
On top of this, Canada has stood firm in defending its supply management system. This policy, which shields dairy and poultry farmers from foreign competition, is described by the government as a cornerstone of food security and economic stability. LeBlanc's position is that it is non-negotiable. That message resonates domestically because it connects trade strategy to everyday life. Milk, cheese, and eggs are not abstract commodities. They are the products on kitchen tables across the country. Critics inside Canada have accused the government of weakness. Opposition leaders argue that promises of quick relief from tariffs have not been delivered. But when examined closely, Ottawa's stance is not weakness. It is a strategy of patience, relying on American domestic politics to do part of the work. The central irony of this trade conflict is that measures meant to squeeze Canada are now bouncing back on the United States. Consider the construction sector. Lumber tariffs of 10% layered on top of existing softwood duties are making homes more expensive to build. That matters in states where housing shortages are already severe. The furniture and cabinet tariffs, set to reach 25%, are another example. These costs are passed on to American consumers who already face higher living expenses. Retailers and importers are voicing frustration, and union leaders warn that prolonged tariffs could actually cost American jobs rather than save them. The auto industry illustrates the same pattern. Duties on Canadian steel and aluminum raise the price of components that U.S. factories rely on. Michigan and Ohio, states central to Trump's political coalition, are especially vulnerable. Companies are lobbying intensely, reminding policymakers that jobs depend on competitive supply chains, not just on national slogans. This is the first layer of backfire. Tariffs designed to force Canada to concede are fueling dissatisfaction at home. Senators and governors hear the complaints from businesses and workers in their districts. The White House may frame tariffs as a patriotic shield, but the daily reality of higher costs and delayed projects tells a different story. For Trump, the political stakes are high. He has built much of his image on being a master negotiator. Yet, if his strategy results in visible pain for American industries, his ability to claim victory weakens. The harder he pushes Canada, the more resistance builds inside his own borders. Beyond the short-term clash over tariffs lies a deeper shift. LeBlanc has said clearly that Canada's trade relationship with the United States will never return to what it once was. The days of assuming stability, of believing the rules of the Mulroney-Reagan or Clinton-Chrétien era still applied, are gone. This is not just rhetoric. It reflects a deliberate strategy to prepare Canada for a different future. LeBlanc describes this moment as a hinge, a turning point. Canada is using the pressure to accelerate diversification. By working with provinces, industries, and labor groups, the government is steering companies toward new partners. Europe has already signed on to a framework with the United States that caps tariffs, but Canada is looking to Europe for markets, not for concessions. Ottawa is also expanding ties with Indonesia, the United Kingdom, and Mexico. These relationships do not replace the American market overnight, but they gradually lessen dependence. The result is what LeBlanc calls a virtuous circle. The more Canadian businesses find success abroad, the less they are trapped by U.S. tariffs. With less dependency, Canada can negotiate with Washington on more balanced terms. And as that balance improves, it reinforces the incentive to diversify further. This is the second major backfire. Instead of tightening control over Canada, Trump's strategy has pushed his northern neighbor into building resilience. What was once a one-sided dependency is evolving into a network of options. The United States will remain Canada's largest trading partner, but no longer its only indispensable one. Dominic LeBlanc's confidence is not a promise of easy victories. It is an acknowledgement that Canada can endure and even adapt under pressure. The tariffs meant to isolate and weaken have instead opened paths for resilience. Trump's policies are producing two clear reversals. First, they are creating internal backlash in the United States, where businesses, unions, and local leaders are shouldering the costs. Second, they are pushing Canada to diversify, turning what was once a weakness into a strategic strength. The relationship between Canada and the United States has indeed changed forever. Tariffs are no longer just a negotiating tactic. They have become a catalyst for restructuring how two economies interact. Trump wanted to make America less dependent on foreign partners, but in the process, he has made Canada less dependent on America. That is why LeBlanc can speak with confidence. The path forward is not about restoring an old status quo. It is about shaping a new reality, where Canada negotiates from a firmer footing and where the United States must reckon with the unintended consequences of its own policies. The backfire is clear, and the lessons will echo in every round of trade talks to come.
And Canada called me a couple of weeks ago. They want to be part of it. To which I said, well, why don't you just join our country? You become 51, become the 51st state.
More than 70% of respondents feel that Trump's comments have strengthened Canadian pride. Close to 80% of Canadians would never vote to become part of the U.S.
When Donald Trump joked that Canada could become the 51st state, it might have sounded like a throwaway line from a campaign rally. But for Canadians, it hit differently. A new Ipsos survey for Global News found that nearly 80% of Canadians said they would never vote to join the United States, while more than 70% said the remark made them prouder to be Canadian. That statistic alone tells the story of a shift in attitude. What began as a jab from Washington has turned into a rallying cry north of the border. Trump's tariffs, his insults, and his brand of political showmanship have not weakened Canada. They have done the opposite. Across provinces, people are turning inward, thinking about what it means to rely less on the U.S. market. From lumber towns in British Columbia to battery factories in Ontario, the same idea is spreading. Canada can build, Canada can supply, and Canada can stand on its own. This new wave of determination didn't appear in a vacuum. It began with economic pressure, diplomatic tension, and a feeling that Washington had crossed a line not just in trade, but in respect. When Trump returned to power in January 2025, his administration launched a new wave of import duties on major trading partners. Canada was hit especially hard. By March 2025, Washington imposed 25 to 35% duties on key exports: softwood lumber, steel, automotive parts, and furniture. Even energy, long protected, faced a 10% tax. These measures, justified on security grounds, aimed to pressure Ottawa in the USMCA review. Instead, they damaged both economies. In British Columbia, cross-border traffic dropped for 8 straight months. Data from the Cascade Border Data Warehouse showed that between February and September, the number of BC vehicles heading south fell by 40% year over year. That decline reflected more than economics. Many Canadians said they no longer felt welcome in the U.S. Workers in the lumber sector stopped traveling south. Families canceled vacations. Meanwhile, small towns in Washington state, long dependent on Canadian shoppers, began to suffer. The Border Policy Research Institute warned the trend was alarming and could force local businesses to change how they operate. Trump's tariffs didn't just hurt Canada, they began eroding America's own border economy.
Right now, we're going to boycott it.
I am not interested in traveling to the States.
Doesn't sound like a very nice place to visit right now.
The trade pressure might have been manageable on its own, but Trump's comments added a different kind of sting. During a public event in mid-2025, he claimed that Canada had called him wanting to be part of it. He followed with the line, "Why don't you just join our country, become the 51st state?" For many Canadians, that was the moment the debate stopped being about tariffs and started being about dignity. The Ipsos poll for Global News, conducted shortly afterward, revealed a national shift in mood. Nearly 4 out of 5 Canadians rejected even the idea of joining the U.S., and most said the statement had strengthened their pride in being Canadian. Political analysts say the comment touched a nerve because it came at a time when Canada's sovereignty was already under pressure. Trump had linked his 51st state quip to discussions about a joint missile defense system, something he called the Golden Dome. The suggestion that defense cooperation could come with a hint of annexation was viewed in Ottawa as deeply offensive. By the time Prime Minister Mark Carney prepared for his meeting with Trump in early October, the mood in Canada was unmistakable. The 51st state line had become a symbol, proof that the United States was no longer treating its northern neighbor as an equal partner. Instead of bending to that pressure, the backlash united the country. Across political lines, Canadians began to rally around one idea. If Washington wanted dominance, Canada would answer with independence. Ottawa's first step was economic retaliation. In March 2025, Canada imposed counter-tariffs worth about 30 billion Canadian dollars, matching Washington's duties dollar for dollar. The targets were deliberate: American steel, aluminum, household goods, and even symbolic products like lawn equipment and household tools. This move wasn't meant to escalate forever. It was designed to show that Canada would not remain passive. By early September, Prime Minister Carney announced that Canada would lift some of those counter-tariffs, but only for products compliant with the USMCA's regional content rules. It was a tactical signal. Canada would reward fair trade, not political coercion. The decision had immediate local effects. Cross-border trade in certain consumer goods improved slightly, and businesses in border towns like Blaine, Washington, began to see Canadian customers returning. But the political message was unmistakable. Canada was taking the high ground, showing restraint while maintaining leverage. Carney's words summed up the new posture clearly: Canada is not for sale. That phrase became a headline across national outlets and a quiet statement of policy. Canada would negotiate, but never surrender its sovereignty. Behind the scenes, Canada also began accelerating programs that could reduce dependence on U.S. supply chains. Provinces rolled out incentives for critical minerals, electric vehicle components, and defense manufacturing. Ontario announced a $17.5 million grant to Electra battery materials for North America's first cobalt sulfate refinery, designed to produce 6,500 tons a year, enough to power 1 million electric vehicles. At the same time, the federal government opened consultations to speed up mining approvals under the One Canadian Economy Bill, ensuring future projects wouldn't be stalled by the same bureaucratic delays that had haunted resource development for decades. The message was clear. If Washington wanted to weaponize trade, Canada would respond by weaponizing innovation and production. As autumn arrived, a new narrative emerged. Trump's tariffs and remarks had backfired. They had driven Canadians to look inward, invest locally, and redefine sovereignty. Communities once reliant on U.S. buyers found new export partners in Europe and Asia. Ottawa expanded trade missions to Indonesia, South Korea, and the EU, focusing on diversification. Pollsters noted that national pride and support for independent economic policy had reached their highest levels in more than a decade. Even Canada's diplomatic tone shifted, less reactive, more strategic. Trump's pressure campaign, meant to extract concessions, instead strengthened Canada's resolve. His 51st state line, meant to assert dominance, only underscored the country's independence. Border crossings may have fallen, but investment at home is climbing. Public unity has grown stronger, and industries once tied to U.S. demand are finding their own footing. From Ottawa to Vancouver, one message echoes: Canada will not be intimidated. It will innovate. In the end, Trump's campaign of pressure did not weaken his northern neighbor. It gave Canada a reason to rebuild, not as a sovereign, but as a sovereign nation determined to shape its own future. That is the paradox of 2025. Every attempt to make Canada smaller has, in fact, made it stronger.